All right, well, China and Russia conducting a joint naval operation, bringing 11 ships near the coast of Alaska last week. The U.S. mobilizing 4 destroyers and patrol planes in response to guide the ships away from U.S. waters. The Wall Street Journal editorial board writing, quote, "The naval patrol is best understood as a warning that U.S. territory isn't safe, as well as a test of how the U.S. will respond. The world is getting more dangerous, and a complacent U.S. political class isn't educating the public about the growing threats." Joining me now, Gatestone Institute senior fellow and author of The Coming Collapse of China and the Great U.S.-China Tech War, Gordon Chang. Gordon, it's great to see you, and I think the editorial board at the Wall Street Journal summed it up pretty nicely there.
Well, certainly, because we have to assume that if there's going to be a war in Asia, and Henry Kissinger tells us it's probable, then we're going to be facing not just China, but also China's friends, specifically Russia and North Korea. And the Wall Street Journal is right. We have a political class that is complacent, has very little sense of urgency. You know, we're on the edge of war. And the Biden administration refuses to fill the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which it drained last year. So I don't know how this gets more dangerous. The Chinese can see it. And I think they're going to try and take advantage of the situation.
They have taken advantage of every situation possible under President Biden so far. So it wouldn't be surprising. But European officials are saying, Gordon, that China, quote, participated actively and was positive about the idea of a third meeting on resolving Russia's war in Ukraine. Now, we know the Chinese have cozied up to the Russians. About 40 countries gathering in Saudi Arabia for a 2-day summit this weekend, and the talks coming after initial discussions in Copenhagen back in June, where China was invited but didn't attend. Your thoughts on the relationships that are forming here and what the Chinese interest would be in peace talks?
The Chinese interest is very clear. They want to bail out their Russian friends who are having trouble in the Ukraine war. So they would like to see the war end. And I think that part of it is because China understands that its support for Moscow, a Moscow that is committing atrocities, a Moscow which is extremely aggressive and belligerent around the world, not just in Ukraine, is not good for China itself. But we also have to remember that the Chinese view the war in Ukraine as not a war between Ukrainians and Russians primarily, but as primarily a proxy war between China and the United States. So we better win this. And if we leave Russia in control of Ukrainian territory, that's a big green light for Beijing's territorial aggression in East Asia.
Brings up a really great point.
Absolutely. Gordon, Joe Pinion here. I mean, what do you think is the Biden doctrine here, if there is one, when you look at all of the advances that China has made that have gone without a response? You look at those silos that were built in the Chinese desert capable of carrying nuclear weapons. There was basically no response. We had the joint naval exercises between the Russian Navy and the Chinese Navy that there was no response. Now they're expanding that off of the coast of Alaska. So what are we supposed to do here where, again, bit by bit, Russia gets tighter with China, China benefiting from this extension of the war, and America, time and time again, seems to ignore this?
Well, first of all, the President of the United States needs to have a candid conversation with the American people, saying that, look, China's Xi Jinping is readying the Chinese people for war. He's mobilizing all of Chinese society, not just the military, and that the United States needs to prepare. And we also, on your point about nuclear weapons silos, we've got to remember that Chinese doctrine is to threaten to use nuclear weapons to prevent the United States and others from coming to the aid of Taiwan, Philippines, Japan, whatever. So this is not necessarily going to be a conventional war, and President Biden needs to ready the American people.
Gordon, you brought up this issue about, China potentially invading parts of Asia. We're talking about Taiwan specifically. Chinese state media releasing a new 8-part TV documentary series about its army's ability to attack Taiwan. And it reportedly shows drills simulating precision strikes against Taiwan and dozens of soldiers pledging to give up their lives if needed in a potential attack against Taiwan. So we've discussed this many times. Your reaction to that and the potential for this to happen reasonably soon?
Well, on the reasonably soon point, we got to remember that on Saturday, this Saturday, the United States issued a warning to China that we were prepared to use force against China at Second Thomas Shoal in the South China Sea. That's the Philippines. You know, this documentary is, again, preparing the Chinese people for war. And it can be Taiwan, but it could be Japan, or it could be some other country. But the point is, the Chinese regime, because of problems at home, which are actually becoming more and more severe, has an incentive to rally the Chinese people with conflict abroad. And that means this is a regime that can take us by surprise, because we Americans think we're at peace. But the Chinese believe that this is a war situation. And by the way, they're exercising with their friends, the Russians, that you just pointed out. And we've had these increasingly provocative statements from North Korea over the last couple days regarding Taiwan.
Gordon, good morning. Mitch Rochelle, good to see you. So the previous administration, the Trump administration, spent 4 years trying to sort of normalize trade relations with China. And so fast forward to today, we've heard nothing from this administration regarding trade balance with China. In fact, all we have is fallout from the COVID era, where we had supply chain disruptions coming from China. Do you think that this administration has any kind of mind towards balancing trade in any way with China? Because that would go a long way, in my view, in trying to, develop a relationship around something other than these military interests around the planet.
As we've seen, Mitch, imports from China have dropped precipitously, 24% in May. But that's because the Chinese are driving foreign business out of China, and because of its provocative actions, convincing people in business suites that war is a real possibility. But unfortunately, the Biden administration has been dog whistling to business that it's okay to stay in China. So that's not a good thing, because this has become now a national security issue, because we cannot assure ourselves that we can transport goods across the Pacific, because it does look like there will very well be a war, as Kissinger has said. So, no, the Biden administration is clueless right now. They think they're at peace. And unfortunately, that's not the way that many people in the world, including aggressors, view the situation.
Gordon Chang, great to see you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie.